I had never been on the deep web, thought the whole thing sounded stupid. Some illicit parts of the internet with unknown atrocities lurking in every corner. But I was working on my master thesis in sociology, and I thought a paper on internet subculture sounded interesting. I got together with a friend and he talked to me about Tor and showed me different precautions I could take to protect my identity and my computer while browsing the deep web. I was ready to explore this bizarre hive I had heard so much about. Needless to say, for about 2 weeks I sifted through old websites that looked like they'd been developed during the 90s, obscure internet relics floating out in the middle of nowhere, derelict websites forgotten by time. Most of it was boring junk, lots of Nazi conspiracy theorists, drug traffickers, pedophiles. It was what I expected. I would have been content to do my paper on Nazi subcultures on the deep web, or maybe even pedophiles, but I ran across something that really interested me. It was a forum awkwardly titled Enthusiast of Suicide. The name led me to believe the forum wasn't of English-speaking origin. The forum itself had a multinational array of boards for users from different countries. I saw boards in Spanish, French, Turkish, Chinese, a vast array of boards, but there was one common theme. Everyone on the boards was fanatically obsessed with suicide. People in the English-speaking boards would share different ideas about suicide, how to execute it, how to lessen the pain for people who were afraid of suffering. Stories about friends who had committed suicide, suicide fetishists sharing explicit pictures with one another, people having philosophical discussions about suicide. It didn't seem to stop. Then on one of the boards I noticed some of the people talking about something called The Suicide Show. It's on tonight. Are you going to watch it? One would say. No, I can't. I have a big day tomorrow. I plan on going to work with my .38 and killing my boss. Then, I'm going to kill myself. The other would respond. I cringed at reading this. The Suicide Show? If it was what it sounded like, then it would be some kind of webcast with a bunch of people committing suicide? I felt my stomach turn and my palms were sweaty. But my mind was racing with curiosity. I had to find out what this show was all about. The suicide cult had already given me enough material for an exciting thesis, but this would be the coup de grace. I found out that the show came on at 1 in my area, and I fished around until I found a link to the show. My throat had a huge knot sitting in it, and I know I must have been sweaty, but I couldn't let my nerves get in the way of my research. I was doing important work here. The live feed had come on with an eerie-sounding MIDI playing in the background. The film quality was grainy, as if filmed using a cell phone or a cheap camera. A woman with a microphone held tightly in both hands stood with a forced smile on her face. I could see her mascara had run down her face as if she had been crying. She looked like she may have been in her 40s. She was Asian, and she looked incredibly uncomfortable and afraid. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my nails digging into it. She made me uneasy. The whole thing had made me uneasy. But this was getting much more strange. She started speaking in a foreign language, so I quickly clicked a button that would display English subtitles on screen. Welcome to the Suicide Show. I'll be your host for this evening, she said, her pitch shaky and unnerved. Just the sound of her frightened voice made this so much more surreal and slightly nauseating. Let's start the show, she shouted with uneasy and forced glee. She threw an arm up in the air, her teeth clenched tightly into a nervous smile, and tear rolling down from one eye. This had to be fake. It was weird, but there was no way I was honestly going to be privy to what I thought I was going to witness. They tried hard to convince me that this was some illicit game show from hell, that this woman was being held against her will like Vanna White at gunpoint, but I wasn't biting. There's no way this was seriously happening. Our first contestant is from New York. His name is Robert Howard. She read from a cue card nervously. Looking up at the camera with wild eyes, she then lowered the card, and I could see her hands shaking, and the compulsory toothy smile flash again. As she lifted a hand to the air, a spotlight highlighted the area around a man sitting in the chair. He had a shotgun in his hands, and I felt my nails dig deeper into my armrest. I clenched my teeth and watched on in horror. He lifted the shotgun to his mouth, and I saw tears running from his eyes, and he fired. I could see the inside of his mouth light up for a brief second as a shot rang out, startlingly loud. I jerked in my chair for the sound of the blast. I saw his head jerk back briefly as a discharge of brain and blood hit the wall behind him. His head then lurched forward. His upper body slumped ahead, folding on in itself, his head dangling. I could see the top of his head, I could see the blood and the gore, and I could see smoke wafting from where the blast had penetrated. I had seen plenty of horror movies, and I had seen plenty of gore on the internet to know the difference. I placed a hand on my mouth. I felt the air vacate my lungs as I stared on in abject terror. "Judges," the woman cried out, throwing her arm as a cheap camera swung around to highlight 3 people sitting at a table. They wore black masks with zippers that formed smiles from mouths, and white tape that formed X's over their eyes with small punctures in them so they could see the show. One judge held up a 3.8, the other a 4.0, and the last judge held up a 3.5. "Our next contestant is Carlos Rivera of Los Angeles," she said, moving on to the next man. The man had stood still, wearing no shirt and a simple pair of jeans. He was holding something in his right hand, and his head was hanging low. He looked like he was focusing, concentrating on something. Trying to steel himself, he had gritted his teeth, clenching them tightly, his body shaking, and suddenly started to yell furiously as he brought a butcher knife up to his neck and started slicing across his throat. The knife cut coarsely through the skin, ripping through flesh, but he didn't get across his entire throat before he fell to his knees and grabbed his gullet with his hands. I saw blood spurting all over the floor, gushing outward from the open wound. His eyes were lit up with fear as he choked on his own blood. "Look at him gush." The woman cried out, her voice a mixture of false enthusiasm, panic, and something akin to disgust. He collapsed into a pile on the floor, his legs kicking as he struggled to breathe. "Judges," the woman said again. The camera swinging around once more, the judges held up a 4.8, 4.9, and 4.7 respectively. There were 2 other contestants, but I couldn't watch him anymore. I couldn't. I closed the window to the feed and walked over to my window. I had to catch my breath. My heart was racing. What had I just seen? I didn't get sleep that night. I could see the man who had slit his own throat. I could see his eyes as he struggled to breathe through a throat full of his own blood. Oh, God. I could see his bloody hands clasping at his neck and some mixture of instinctual reaction or regretful horror. I could see him kick him on the floor, laying sideways in a pool of his own blood. Every time I closed my eyes, it's all I saw. Needless to say, I dropped the paper on the suicide enthusiasts. Okay, so this is a relatively popular creepypasta, and it's interesting to come across it as it's one of the deep web tales kind of deal, which for the most part, in my opinion, are a tad too edgy, and by that they can be pretty cringeworthy at times. Here we have the concept of a game show that revolves around rating the suicides of several individuals, rated by a panel of suicide connoisseurs. Pretty fucked up concept if you ask me. Now let's take a look at this creepypasta analytically, okay? Let's assume that this exists. One could film in a remote location. Somewhere in Asia, maybe in the boonies here in North America, Mexico, South America, anywhere. Europe. Let's assume that that's a reality, okay? Let's assume that is the truth. Now let's also assume that for an operation like this, these people make a sizable penny. Enough to keep filming, have a profit, and even pay off officials that may be chasing them down. Who knows? Like the game Manhunt, for example, right? Now, technicals considered, you really don't need much at all to run a production like this, right? A couple $1,000s for the cheap equipment, right? Cameras, maybe a couple mics, mics for setup, and bandwidth, obviously, so you can, upload and stream and, post videos on some secure server you got somewhere, right? And if you look at it with a couple $1,000, you definitely have kickstarted a suicide game show. Again, we're not using high-end cameras here or mics. This is strictly a, cheap, very, very budget show that has a very dark twist. And let's also assume these people have a web page, again, their own transfer protocols, not even on Tor really, but anywhere, on their dollar. Now, if that all works out, then this could very much be a reality. It could, and that's one thing we can't forget. Trust me, I've seen some weird shit on the internet. I remember seeing a weird Japanese game show or something, and it was like an offshoot of the Guinea Pig series, which if you don't know what that is, it's like fake snuff pornography. And it was, pretty weird. Let me tell you that. Now let's also assume that, again, if this is real, okay, for it to be as entrenched as it is, this protagonist could probably not locate such a page with this relative ease. Let that be a goddamn fact. Now technically this Gorefest, which from a story perspective, by the way, pushed me away, it was showing some real edge there, and I couldn't really handle it, mind you, but as a concept, it could happen. It's a very fucked up concept, and the even more fucked up part is that, yeah, it can definitely happen. So why am I doing all these assumptions, you may ask? Well, part of it is that I've lost my mind, but also that, again, for a creepypasta to be good, remember, it has to have a hint of believability, a flare of reality to it. Ladies and gents, this is where a creepypasta flourishes. When it has a concept that could unfortunately be a reality, say such a 1999. Weird broadcasting going on. Hell, this is similar to that almost, except without the morbid twists. It could have happened. 1999 could have definitely happened. Ted the Caver, that could definitely have happened. That's what makes a lot of these stories that have some reality good. Now, this did rely a lot on gore, and that should have been toned down, but it stuck to its premise wholeheartedly, and kept its pacing pretty neat throughout, and considering that, it served well, and overall it was a decent creepypasta that honestly, it makes you think, could this have occurred? Absolutely. The world is a fucked up place, ladies and gentlemen, but again, I'm not here to scare you. If this was to exist, trust me, we would have known about it by now, if this was something that went on and on and on. Again, just because something can exist doesn't mean it necessarily has to. Alright, I really don't think the suicide game is any kind of a reality. But then again, I can't say for sure. I can't say it doesn't exist or it, definitely does exist. Again, it's one of those things that are out there, a myth, so to speak. But from a very educated standpoint, I'm just going to make a wild goose assumption here. I'm going to make a very educated assumption here and say this probably doesn't exist. I mean, we've seen one suicide website on the Deep Web series, the Sanctioned Suicide. Nothing like this has come close except for that weird cult of euthanasia. Remember that? But that being said, this was a creepypasta, obviously focusing on the Deep Web Suicide game. And if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it, and let me know what you thought about this creepypasta below in the comments, by the way. I always love to read whatever you all wrote, and I definitely like to see what everyone else's opinions are on the subject itself. That being said, this has been another creepypasta video, and if you, again, enjoyed it, let me know, and I'll definitely do more. As always, Saturday is when the next creepypasta goes up, and hopefully we'll return to gaming over there. It's nice to take a little step outside and, see and branch out to other genres as well. But that being said, I'm rambling on for too much. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.